the hall of explorers, and up from the dusty tomb.
Hey, buddy, watch this.
All right, folks, it's time for more custom cards from the RegisKillbin community, and this time I asked you guys to make some alternate versions of Saviors of Uldum cards, changing the flavor a little bit, certainly can change the balance. We got a mix here of some cards that took it really far, others that made very subtle, but I think very impactful and important changes when it comes to card design. That said, let's go ahead and jump into these custom cards. Up first here, I have Reno the Relicologist, far and away the most submitted custom card of all. Now, interestingly, Reno is seeing play in driving Highlander Mage, or at least partly driving Highlander Mage in combination with Zephyrus. So a card that a lot of people think may not need to be changed from a balance standpoint, but I think from a flavor standpoint, I personally still find Reno a little bit disappointing, just dealing damage to the board. That doesn't feel like old Reno. It doesn't necessarily feel like the Reno that's like charismatic, and there's not a lot of story element there. So a handful of people introduced some bigger ideas for Reno, including this one from Lamoyo, and this won't be the last Reno we see. Stats and costs stay the same, but Battlecry reads, if your deck has no duplicates, fill your hand with random mage spells. And I like that idea because it's kind of like this Reno who's going around collecting these gemstones that you can see in his Gatling wand, I think Blizzard has called it, the big gun that he's holding. I like the idea of him collecting these different relics and spells, adding them to your hand, and then he's got, you know, a lot of firepower, and that's what this card does. Now, of course, the card in the game, it's still a gun, it's a Gatling gun, it shoots minions, right? But you don't get that, like, collection aspect, or relic aspect, or, like, archaeology aspect, whereas this card does that. It also combines thematically with the mage hero power from the quest, where you can add a random spell to your hands. There's a little bit of a connection there. So this would shift Reno from a tempo card to a value or resource generator card. It would be a lot more chaotic. It would probably be worse, technically, because playing Reno to influence the board is pretty important right now in Highlander Mage, but it would just be more fun, I think. A cooler design in a lot of ways, and probably tells the story just a little bit better to me as well. So moving on here to Overflow from Imaginary MDA. You'll see here the change for Overflow is that instead of just having arbitrary numbers, it's conditional based on the size of your hand. So it reads, overdraw a card. What that means is you would draw enough cards until you overdraw one, until your hand gets full to 10, and then you burn that 11th card. So what happens is, based on how many cards you draw, so say you have 2 cards in hand, right? You're going to draw 8 to fill your hand, and then you're going to burn the 9th card. So if you draw 8, that means you're going to heal 8 health to all characters instead of 5. Alternatively, if you already have 8 cards in hand, when you play Overflow, you're going to get a much smaller effect. You're only going to draw 2, and you're only going to heal 2. But there are some magic spots there where you can maybe refill your hand more successfully than Overflow does right now and heal for a ton, but there's also some downsides, and you have to sacrifice a card in the process because you're burning it, and occasionally if you can't follow this up with another play and you just have to, like hero power for instance, you might even burn 2 cards because when it comes back to your turn, if your hand remains full, that second card's going to get burned as well. But I love that this puts a little bit of control in the player's hand, and it makes this card just feel bigger because it can draw more, but with some risk added in. So it also just matches up the name, Overflow. You've gotten too many, right? It's overflowing. It's not just the right amount of water. So I think this idea matches up way better with the art and name. Now, from a balance standpoint, I think you could arguably make this more expensive because suddenly it draws you a lot of cards sometimes, and that's very, very good to go from an empty hand to a full one. But nonetheless, I think the change here from a mechanic standpoint really, really fits this card nicely. So now let's take a look at Colossus of the Moon, and I'll say right now, a lot of people submitted the same design where you very simply add Taunt to Colossus of the Moon. I think it was a fairly obvious idea, so shout out to everybody else that did it, but a lot of people tweaked the stats in directions that I didn't like. They nerfed the stats or overcompensated a little bit too hard, or sometimes just spelled the name of the card wrong too. So you got to be careful with that stuff. So this one from Bakur got the closest of all of the cards that I think made this tweak, because 99 feels like a fine number. That's like a little bit of a discount here on the stats to make up for getting Taunt, but still is significant for a 10-drop card, and it just feels nice and symmetrical as well. So yeah, giving Colossus of the Moon Taunt would go a long way towards making it more playable, right? Because suddenly it's like 4 attacks that it's guaranteed to eat, potentially even more suddenly. if your opponent's trading in with smaller stuff. But you've got the 2 divine shields to work through, and then both of the health pools, the 1 health and the 9 health pool as well. So a pretty nifty idea here that probably makes this card playable in some decks. Now, Colossus of the Moon has actually seen a little bit of play in some like cheat decks that are trying to cheat big stuff onto the board. This might be unhealthy for the Conjurer's Calling pool, so I'm a little bit worried about that, but that's more of a Conjurer's Calling problem than a Colossus of the Moon problem, because as this card stands on its own, making it have taunt would really go a long way towards squeezing it into a control deck here or there, which I think would be really fun to have this big late game taunt bomb that's actually probably worth it, because there's just so much upside on the Divine Shield and Reborn stuff. So now let's take a look at the card that was the most revolutionary in its changes by far. This one's from My Name Is For Real, and it's Naga Sandwich, a pun. Everybody's been making this expansion because of the card Naga Sandwich. But this one's actually creating a sandwich where you choose a minion, and then you summon 2 5/5 Naga elites that attack it. So basically they come in and they attack the minion like a sandwich. And we know this is a little bit of a bees style effect, so Druid was a good class to put this in. It is a big departure from Mage, of course. But I thought this one was just such a cool idea for a design that matches up with bees. It's a play on the name that actually works out beautifully. The art represents it incredibly well. So My Name Is For Real, despite going really, really deep on this one, he did such a good job that I just had to include it. So now let's take a look at the Ghostly Battle Axe from Minivat22. This is a reference to the fact that when we were looking up the teaser art for this card before the expansion, someone in chat found the game model in World of Warcraft that matched up to what is now Splitting Axe, and we thought it was going to be called Ghostly Battle Axe. It turns out there were 2 weapons in the game that shared a model with very slight color variations. So Minivat took the Ghostly Battle Axe name and ran with it here, keeping the mana and stats the same, but instead making your totems gain Reborn, which is a bit of a ghostly effect. So really cool application of the name, and it happens on the both Battlecry and Death Rattle, so you can essentially do it 2 turns in a row, which is a really cool idea if you want to create sticky totems for some reason. Like maybe you really value a healing totem because of all your Reborn stuff. Maybe you want spell damage to stick on board, and the Ghostly Battle Axe can help you do that. And if your opponent doesn't take care of both halves, then you might get to apply Reborn to the same totem twice, essentially getting like 3 summons out of a single totem. And if you have other totem synergies, that could really help you create a sticky board. And keep in mind, this also works with Flame Tongues and Mana Tide. So protecting like a card draw engine with your Mana Tide totem, preventing your opponent from dealing with it, could go a long way, even in something like a control deck. So I think this gives a lot more influence to totem style plays, supports it much, much better, ties in thematically with the expansion of Reborn, and connects to the name. So all in all, absolute home run here from Minivat. Moving on here to another look at Reno, the Relicologist. Again, same stats and costs, but the Battlecry reads, if your deck has no duplicates, cast all spells in your hand, targets chosen randomly. And again, I think this captures the theme or fantasy of Reno a little bit better, in that he's just got this uncontrollable Gatling wand, and he's just shooting like crazy, right? All the spells from hand are just flying out in a really chaotic fashion. And this is really cool with something like Mana Cyclone too, where you just add a bunch of random spells to your hand. You don't really know what you're going to get. Who knows? Throw it up in the air and see. It's kind of like a Yogg or Puzzle Box style effect, but with a little bit more control, because for something really risky or something really bad, you don't have to play your Reno. You can actually wait and time it and try to influence how things go. So maybe you wait for those 3 Pyroblasts to go to face before you play Reno and risk targeting yourself, of course, because that could go really poorly. So I think Mattress Man, again here, just changed how Reno worked in a way that's a little bit more fun and fitting for the character and the story of Uldum, and the fact that he's a relicologist acquiring these stones and resources and then using them in this crazy weapon. So just a bit more enjoyable of a card design. Moving on here to the Desert Obelisk from Spectre Dragon. This has a very, very subtle change. It simply reads hero instead of random enemy. And what that means is you can create combos for Desert Obelisk to be an OTK much more reliably. Because if you play Desert Obelisk right now and your opponent has a board of like 1/1s, your Desert Obelisk, you're just going to clear the 1/1s, are not going to hit face, which means it's really, really hard to play this for an OTK deck. And trust me, I've tried it. But if you make them all target the enemy hero, suddenly a lot of options open up, ensuring that that damage hits face, goes where you want it to, and it can be used as a win condition instead of just kind of a random like board targeting condition, thereby increasing its reliability a ton. So a very simple tweak, just a single word, makes this card like 10 times more interesting to me. So moving on here to the Candle Taker from King Koopa. Another change here that's fairly subtle. We lose an attack point, but we also gain spell damage +1, which I think is really important for a card like this, because right now the Reborn minions, although they're being played quite a bit in Reborn Quest Paladin, they just don't do much. Most of them are kind of just only Reborn minions. There are a handful, of course, that do other things, but I like giving each of the Reborn minions their own kind of unique angle, right? Some of them summon 1/1 taunts, some buff your other minions. This one would then be the spell damage Reborn minion, and I think the character looks pretty fitting, and it reminds me a little bit of something like Kobold Geomancer, right? There are some flame particle effects there, so it does look a bit more spell-like than most because of the candle. Maybe a mummified candle suddenly grants you some increased power in the spell world, or maybe this was simply a mage or sorceress of some sort that is now reborn as a kobold mummy. So art or name aside, like it's a fit, it's a good fine fit, but also just add something unique, a little bit of flair to make all these Reborn cards stand out a little bit, so they're not quite so bland. Now, would Reborn Paladin care about the spell damage +1? Probably not, but there might be some other deck that did, that's just trying to keep some spell damage on board more reliably to guarantee a future play or set up some kind of crazy damage combo. I don't know what it would look like, but Candle Taker creates those opportunities, and that's what's important from card design. Like, let the players have some fun, figure some things out, make tools that are thereby used. This card helps do that. So moving on here to Pharaoh's Blessing from Imaginary MDA. Paladin spell, of course, it's 6 mana. Normally you just get a standard +4/+4 buff, but with this one, it's conditional based on the number of spells in your hand. So if you play Pharaoh's Blessing and you have like 9 other spells in hand, this is going to be a +9/+9 buff, which is pretty crazy. And again, I like this, that this creates moments for this card to shine, or a deck list that makes this a little bit more unique. Right now, Pharaoh's Blessing is just falling a little short. It's not that much better than something like Blessing of Kings, comes a little bit late in the game, feels worse than a card like Spike-Red Steed did in the past, so it doesn't really do anything to carve out its own little niche, its own place to thrive, but this change would help it do that, right? It loses the taunt aspect, so it's not as defensive, but it could be a more aggressive tool, or more tempo-oriented tool, or maybe like in a King Phaoris deck, for instance. There are a handful of different things that happen because of this Pharaoh's Blessing build, and that's cool. I don't know what deck would look like. Maybe it'd be really bad, but at least it would be unique and give you a chance to do something fun with it, whereas right now, Pharaoh's Blessing just feels a little bit flat. So finally here, one last version of Reno the Relicologist from Smiles, and this one reads, Battlecry, if your deck has no duplicates, discover 3 spells and then cast them with targets chosen randomly. And yet again, this is another design that I think gets that aspect of gathering these different relics or spells and then utilizing them to unleash some havoc on the board and on your opponent. And the discover aspect in particular is really cool with this one, because you do have some influence. It's like you're raiding a tomb, or an old archaeologist dig, and it's like, oh my gosh, there's 3 things here on the shelf. Which one am I gonna pick? Which, do I want the chalice? Do I want the old shield, or do I want the crown, right? It kind of feels this like Indiana Jones sort of thing almost. And you got to pick your spells, and then you got to hope for the very best. So, you can go for 3 damage spells and hope to just magically kill your opponent. You can go for 3 secrets to be super consistent and reliable. But nonetheless, it's still a tempo influencing card. Could have some really big swing potential, which is important, I think, in a no duplicate style deck. So all around, it feels better. I think it's more creative. It delivers on the premise of Reno far better than the default card does. So yet another great improvement to Reno that does things differently than the other 2. So 3 designs here, I think, all improved on the base version, which is pretty cool to see. And that wraps it up for this custom card review. I thought this one was pretty cool, seeing some alternate designs. We'll probably do this for future expansions as well. I know I included 3 Renos here, but I thought they all offered some improvements, and it was far and away the most submitted cards. It just turned out a lot of the better cards were Renos. There were probably like 30 or 40 Renos submitted, where everything else had like max 4 or 5, and most cards just had 1 ofs or 2 ofs at best. So it's just kind of a law of numbers in this one. There were so many Renos. But that said, I'm sure you're curious about the next custom card review. The theme next time is going to be demon hero cards. I want you to design me a hero card based on a demon from World of Warcraft. So you guys know some demons that are already in Hearthstone. You can certainly use those. Maybe try to find some new artwork if you can. There are other demons that haven't made their way into artwork. You can make up a totally new character too. I just want it to be a hero card that's cool, balanced, thematic, and a demon. Now, does that mean it will die to Sacrificial Pact? I don't know. Sure, that's a dumb rule, but maybe. Don't design around that, but it's always a possibility. That said, also share your thoughts on these cards in the comments below. Let me know what you guys think, as always. Find everything you need in the description if you're looking for more details on card submissions and so on and so forth. Thank you so very much for watching, and until next time, game on.